Every great company starts with someone who says, there's gotta be a better way. This is the show for founders who go against all odds and push through when the odds say quit. The leaders who trade certainty for the pursuit of their vision and build something remarkable. This is Audacity of Entrepreneurs, where serial entrepreneurs, exited founders, executives, and their advisors have unfiltered conversations about what it really takes to build a company. Here is your host, Nick Urison.
Welcome to another episode of Audacity of Entrepreneurs. My next guest today is actually the inspiration behind this podcast. Because when I was thinking about my podcast, I wanted to demonstrate what it takes for an entrepreneur to stay an entrepreneur and keep pushing every day. And that's not an easy task. It takes a lot for an individual, both knowledge-wise, but also mentally. And it's not an easy task. So I was thinking about, okay, what do we call it? And then I came up with the name Audacity of Entrepreneurs, because it really is an audacity. You're taking on the big boys. And then I thought, okay, who do I think of who practices this? And I remembered my next guest, because he said to me when we met, Nick, we are the only company in our space. Everybody else is $1 billion company, but we are the only one who's small. So I thought, who is a better example for this podcast? So he is a serial entrepreneur, no doubt. And also he has a podcast called The Defender's Log that I would urge everyone to go check out. Great conversations. And he's the CEO of Adam Networks, which is a company that protects people by only allowing technologies that upholds that objective. And when he's not working, his latest hobby is ball hockey that he told me. And with that, everybody, meet my guest, David Redekop. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Nick. Wow, you're literally doing the Dale Carnegie principle of giving someone a high reputation to live up to. That's a very good strategy. And I just hope I meet the expectations. Thanks for having me.
With you, I don't need to try very hard. Frankly, it's already there. I just spell it out. So David, when you and I had a conversation about what can we talk about that serves the purpose and the vision of this podcast, is the subject that came up was what drives an entrepreneur for success and to success. So you laid this out in 3 different ways, and that's what for everybody listening, we're gonna talk about this in 3 different areas. First of all, personally, what does it mean for someone to become an entrepreneur? What does it take personally? And the second thing is, in this day and age, with AI getting into every single thing, how does an entrepreneur leverage the tech stack? Because without the tech stack, you're not building anything that doesn't scale. And at the same time, that's not an easy task. So we're going to talk about that. And then, but most important, which is something that is dear to David's heart, is what are we doing for the next generation? So those are our subjects today that we're going to cover. And also, right at the end, for those who stay tuned until the end, we're going to, or I should say, David is going to reveal something that is going to affect over 42 million internet users. So stay tuned. Don't fast forward, because the conversation is going to be very interesting. So with that, let's jump right in, David. So personally, what does it take for someone to become an entrepreneur and be successful?
That is a very good question. What does it take for someone to be an entrepreneur? And I think I would have to go to the same path of inquisition that I had years ago. What does it take? And there was a couple of key elements that kept on standing out over and over again. And no doubt that the number one requirement that I observed that's present in everybody that's a successful entrepreneur is an internal burning desire. It's like this internal flame that cannot be extinguished no matter how many times you fail, no matter how many times you fall down, no matter how many times you look at the bank account and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to remortgage my house. Okay, that'll take care of payroll for one more week kind of thing. And no matter what the hurdle is, that there is never a remotest sense of giving up because there is just this never-ending burning desire. That is what I've observed in people over the years that have been successful, or even those that have not necessarily been success in, whatever measurement system you want to use, but are successful in that they exude a real sense of purpose. There's real enthusiasm, there's excitement in what they do, and they make a difference to the people around them, right? And sometimes the people that are successful don't even know who they all have impacted until many years later. Some of them not until they have descendants that have survived for generations find out what their grandpa did or what their grandma did that made a difference. So that internal burning desire is something that I was blessed with. Just this idea of working for someone else. There's nothing wrong with people that do that at all, because we need everybody to play a different role. But for me, I felt like I could do amazing things given that my parents did a lot of things to instill that burning desire. So I would say that would be number one in my life as well.
The question, are leaders made or born? So are entrepreneurs, can you become an entrepreneur? Can that burning desire be put inside of you, or is it part of your nature?
I wonder that too, sometimes, but I think what I've observed is that some people only become an entrepreneur very late in life. When Colonel Sanders first started KFC, he's a classic story. That was his whole lifetime in the making. And there are a lot of people that don't really have the makeup early on in life that you would peg as entrepreneurs. But it's almost like that spark could be in many people. And for that to be lit in the first place is sometimes unpredictable, because you just don't know when the one thing will do that. And for me, what that was the technology, how the internet changed everything about the way we're doing things. I was working in the field of actuarial science. So we were doing risk assessment, and we were writing very long COBOL routines for certain risk assessment processes. And then along came two things. First, the PC that brought the spreadsheet to a color screen, and secondly, an internet connection. So those two things all of a sudden forced a whole new paradigm on the whole world. But those that saw early on how significant that paradigm was, a lot of people's sparks were lit at that moment. And that's why we have this internet generation, people born in the early 70s, that somehow made something about the internet. And I fall into that category. I just feel like one of the luckiest people in the world to be born in that place at that time, to come to, Canada. Canada at that time was a cool place to come to, by the way. I'm not going to make a whole lot of comments about what it is today, but just let me tell you, when we came to Canada, it was because our parents worked long and hard to come here on a fully legal basis, because we saw Canada as the place where you could work hard and actually bring your dreams to reality. And all of those things together, was I born into it? I think a lot of it had to do with an upbringing in my case, but it was the spark. It was a series of sparks that got me to the point where this is just too exciting to be an employee somewhere. There's so much we can do that's really cool with the internet.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's you are so in anybody in your family were entrepreneurs or not?
My family history is with the Mennonites. Mennonites originally came from Europe back in the 1600s and moved around any place that would give our people exemption from the military and freedom to run our own schools, right? So it was a faith first priority tradition. And as a result, we were mostly off grid and independent agrarians, right? So we loved having our own farms, our own communities where we would share, having an ecosystem of sharing resources. And so, in that sense, yes, there was an entrepreneurial spirit that was literally part of everything we did. It was all about where do I expend my energy and what is the return. That was just part and parcel of the thinking. Investing and return in all kinds, not just in money, but what am I learning that's going to get me results? What am I doing this morning, the first thing when I get up, that's going to get me results that day? So in that sense, yes, I come from a long line of people that were independent entrepreneurs.
So I envy people like you because I never had that. My parents, my entire family, both mother's and father's side, all doctors.
Wow.
And I was a very good student, and I was always looked at as the next doctor in the family. And in fact, my mother would joke about the fact that they both, my parents had their clinics, and they had all the equipment, and she would joke about the fact that, oh, we don't have to worry about all this going to waste because he's gonna take over, and then he's gonna so and I had no interest whatsoever, and I became an engineer. And uh, growing up, I had no notion of running, forget about building, but running a business. No, nothing like that. And um,
Well, in
in
the world
fact,
of AI, now look at where you are now. You are more prepared doing what you're doing now, Nick,
oh yeah,
compared to if you'd been a doctor, because of all of the careers that are being disrupted, it's all the white collar stuff that's now at the biggest risk of
yeah,
being
exactly.
dissolved.
But there is another thing that it's for people like you. You know this already. It's in your DNA. But for me, what I didn't know was, first of all, I had no idea what entrepreneur meant. The second thing was, I thought that entrepreneur was a guy who runs a business. That's it. So, in other words, for me, there was no distinction between being a business owner and being an entrepreneur. And they're two totally different things. And totally of course, it was my drive that started my first business. But I looked at myself as someone who runs a business, who owns a business, who is his own boss. That's all I saw. And then as I started to realize that there is a lot more that goes into being an entrepreneur, and you're right, you get to realize you're an entrepreneur only at a later stage in your life, because only at that later stage that you get to develop the thick skin and the and the stamina and everything else. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was like past 40 years old when I realized I was an entrepreneur, and I had already uh, started three businesses, and I was already in internet space, and I was literally uh, shamelessly promoting what it is to be an entrepreneur, and that I was one of them. So So it's you're right. It comes later. But I'm gonna put something else to you. Tell me what you think. If you have that burning desire inside of you, and you have a vision for that burning desire to obviously capitalize on it, where does the family come into this to be able to successfully pursue that vision?
That's a very good question. And any entrepreneur that has a family that reflects upon it uh, tends to have a struggle. Certainly, everyone that I know, where it seems like it's absolutely impossible to balance it right. So at some point, you're just like, I really, really messed up. And when I see entrepreneurs now, like me and my wife, that have been married since 1993, so we're over 30 years now, 5 children. And when I see other people that have been married that long and have a family and they still love each other, my very first thought is, I wonder how many times they forgave each other. Because we mess up so much as entrepreneurs. We so often put work before our family. And it's almost like it's a rite of passage to make that mistake before you kind of figure out in the end, okay, we're not going to balance it perfectly, but here's a framework that works for me. This is a framework that works for my family. And it turns out just being a little bit more of an improved communicator goes a long way. The entrepreneur is already used to, nobody gets what I'm thinking except me. So I'm just going to, you know, drive like a railroad car, by force right through whatever needs to happen in order to get done and meet my goals, meet my deadline, my own deadlines that I impose upon myself. And we tend to be okay with not having communicated everything, and we can't do that with our families. And so as a result, I have 5 sons with relationship levels at different stages. What I learned with the first one, I did better with each subsequent one. So the baby's got it great. He's only 13, and we have a fantastic father-son relationship, and we're planning lots of things this summer to do together. But I can't make up that time with my firstborn that I missed. And
Yeah.
so that's not a success story. That is a learning story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's formula for success, right? So if knowing what you know today at the beginning when you had your first child, you would have handled it totally different. So I'm gonna give you a different perspective. I like actionable stuff. So I like to always bring it down to, okay, how can we use this? So this is what I say. As an entrepreneur, you have a vision and you drive towards that vision. Driving means you're going from A to B, right? You're moving and ideally moving upwards. That movement has to be fueled with energy. Where does that energy come from? It's inside of that burning desire, right? That's what produces that energy. So this is what I say. I see young people, what do you want to be? What are you going to do when you finish college? I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I say this to them. Look, be an entrepreneur. You're going to change the world because that's usually what entrepreneurs are looking to do. But be careful. Before you make that decision, make sure the support system you have around you, that could be, if you are very young, your parents, your siblings. If you are already ahead in life, married, engaged, whatever, your girlfriend, your fiance, your wife, are 100% on board, because the only source of energy you're going to have is going to be your mental state. And if they are not on board with you going up and down in life, and they see this as not a serious thing, when you're going to get a real job kind of approach, it's going to drain your energy and ultimately will drive you to failure. So make sure that your support system around you embrace you becoming an entrepreneur, and that they will support you no matter what. Secure that first, then jump right in. If not, don't bother. You are with the wrong people. Either if it's your immediate family, parents, whatever, put a distance and then go pursue it, because you can't have it both ways. If you are with someone and she's always looking down, question, because ultimately when you are down, the only way, and you're going to be down many times, the only way you're going to get back up is by driving yourself up. And if somebody is constantly talking you down, then that's going to be very hard. So what do you think about that drastic approach I have?
Nick, that is 100% in line with what my experience has been. And in the previous business that I co-founded before Atom Networks, we had an independent contractor model, still do. I'm still a director there, and I attend board meetings, but I'm no longer actively involved on a day-to-day basis. But the business model of independent contractors was basically such that we let folks know that we're about to join the company to say, if you don't have spousal support, we do not have any success rate. It was that important, because even independent contractors that dictate their own hours, and there's no clock in and clocking out, and there's no supervisor calling you to say, where are you? Because it's independent enough that you really do need to have that get up and go. Even that kind of a rule requires spousal support, because you don't have any guarantee of any income. And so outside of a salary job, there's a level of security attribute that a spouse often associates with it. And that's partially a consequence of our education system that has created a number of good students that were basically told to say, if you follow this recipe, this is how you'll have success. And then when something falls outside of that recipe, they have a level of discomfort. So I don't blame spouses like that for having a lack of security. They just haven't been exposed to the worldview of, if you take a risk of this kind, the reward is gargantuan. If you take no risk, your reward is never gargantuan. So that's so what you just described is absolutely spot on in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned the hard way, and I remember once being told by, at the time, my wife, was I had investors, and it was a tough time, and I was obviously trying, and I was working on something for the investors, and she said, "What is this? If you were going to put so much time into this, you should have married your investor." So so it's tough. So you really have to get them to buy in. And also, in all fairness, as an entrepreneur, this is your lifestyle. You chose it, so you put up with it. You suck it up, and if it's down, you have no money. You borrow from a credit card, you cover the payroll, whatever. You do all those things, but also to drag an innocent party into that kind of lifestyle, they really have to sign off on it. Otherwise, you can't just surprise it with this decision. Oh, one day I'm gonna be so. Uh, yeah, I'm glad you agree. I want to ask you one other thing, because we're talking about personally, what it is that it takes. How does money factor into becoming an entrepreneur or succeeding? How much role does it play?
It plays an outsized important role when there's a lack of it. So, but what happens is that the lack of money creates this outsized amount of anxiety about it, right? And there's so much time and obsession that we spend as a society on money that you could literally crawl inside of this prism called money and then look at it from a different perspective every day. And I'll just share some of the perspectives that I've been able to look through over the years. But one of them for certain is that money is a master or a servant, and you choose. The lack of it makes you a servant for some time. And sometimes that is what's needed in order for the priorities to be set right to where you become the master. And when you switch from barely being able to pay the bills to being able to be very, very thoughtful about where to allocate capital, that is a fundamental switch. And many entrepreneurs go through that switch a few cycles in their lives. It's not a one-time event. But the more pain and the more of a burden we're able to sustain, the bigger of a reward we can sustain at the end. This is what I've experienced over and over again. Many entrepreneurs, and I would expect people listening to this, would know the name of Tony Robbins. And Tony Robbins has this incredible story of how his dad was a proud dad, and it wasn't even his real dad, but it was his foster dad or stepdad that had someone knock on the front door on Thanksgiving and offer a meal, but he was so proud that he couldn't accept it. And then that was the initial seed in Tony Robbins' life, that not only did he never want to experience that again, but that is what gave him real purpose to feed others. And just follow where he's at right now, but he's well past 1 billion meals served. And it is an unbelievable life story of how a hardship at one point in your life can actually be the birthing element of real significance. And the future of AI is promised to be an abundance of everything. The biggest challenge, though, we're going to have is to find how to extract real meaning when you have abundance, because I noticed that we have an abundance of sugar and it did not make us healthier. We have an abundance of entertainment and it's made us lazier. So if we have more abundance in more areas of life, will that really bring more meaning? I'm not sure. I'm not saying that everybody's going to fall into a trap where an abundance just becomes a negative experience. I don't think it has to be, but these are all realities that we're going to have to grapple with one way or the other.
So this is I love this approach. I'm gonna tell you a story from my end. So my best friend is Brazilian, and he comes from a wealthy family. We met in London in a language school, and of course I got to meet his parents soon after. And at this point, they are thankfully still alive, and they become like my parents. And his father was a lawyer. As a young lawyer, he wins a case against the government. It's a land case. And he tells this story that once he won the case, he became so famous in the legal community that he started to get similar deals coming to him, because they now saw him as the mastermind of winning cases like this. And these are major cases, like millions and millions and millions of dollars in Brazil. We're talking 60, 70 years ago. So he made already so much money, and now he had all these new cases coming to him. He was in his early 30s, and he said to himself, oh my God, now I don't have to do anything. All these cases will be coming to me. Each one will make so much money, and it will put me behind the desk for the rest of my life. How much do I need? Not much, especially at this point. And he retired and he became a gentleman farmer, having an orange farm,
Wow.
early 30s. So so he would tell this story about not to become a slave of money,
Right.
and therefore, live a life. And then later, when I say later, just like finding out later in life that I was an entrepreneur, I started digging into this concept of happiness. And I heard him say the same thing. You don't become happy by getting the things you want to have. You should learn to become happy with what you have already,
Right.
which then gets you everything you want in life. So this is my conclusion, and this is what I always advocate: is as long as whatever you are engaged in is not about money, but is creating value. Money is just a KPI that measures how good it is, how valuable it is. It's a byproduct. But no matter how much it is or how little, first learn to be happy with what you have. And that happiness will ultimately lead to much, much more to come your way. So money does not really drive the entrepreneur. It's just a byproduct. That's my conclusion. What do you think?
You reminded me of that story that you've probably heard many times of the entrepreneur that goes on what he thinks is a well-deserved holiday in the Caribbean and hires a fisherman to take him out. And it's just him and the fisherman that are fishing with the rod. And the entrepreneur says, "This is fantastic. Look at this. We caught enough fish for us to have a full supper together. Have you ever thought about having multiples of these?" And the local fisherman says, "Why would I do that?" "Well, you could, do even better. You could build a business around having a fleet of them." "Why would I do that?" "Well, then you could even build a company of people that you could employ that could do that." And well, he turns it around and says, "What would you do if you had that kind of that kind of a company making a lot of money?" And he realizes what he would do is go on his own boat and go fishing.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
So sometimes people already do, but the other thing that that this reminded me of is I hope you don't mind me doing this, but in a very well known um, writing, it says, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want," in the original English, or if we were to translate it properly, "I lack nothing." Because the idea behind that writing originally was, I am happy, I have joy, because I'm not lacking anything. I have enough food, I have roof over my head. Most importantly, I have someone that loves me. And so sometimes we work so hard that we kind of push people away that love us. So we're fortunate enough that we have maintained relationships and they still want us nearby. Dude, you've got everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, look, your health comes first. I always say this: health first, family next, work comes last.
Yeah.
So when somebody says, "Oh, I've got this, they feel bad for taking the day off or for asking for whatever. Says, no, don't.
Yeah.
This is health first, family next. Okay, just the personal aspect, because that's the driver, that's the
Right.
constitution of everything. We can go on forever. So let's talk about the tech stack. So now that you are an entrepreneur, so in 21st century, 2026. what is an entrepreneur? What should an entrepreneur must get up to speed with? What kind of tech stack?
Yeah, when it comes to tech for an entrepreneur today, I don't know other businesses well enough that don't rely on tech anymore, because tech is the great arbitrage tool for those that make good use of it. And arbitrage comes in every possible form, not just in the financial terms where you purchase a product on one exchange and you sell it at another exchange that's currently offering more, but where you arbitrage the capabilities, or you arbitrage the actual application, the utility rate of technology. And so whatever industry you're in, technology has this unbelievable productivity gain advantage. And so having that identified is at the core. We don't have to love tech to use it. There's enough people out there, thank goodness. I mean, we have people coming to us literally from university with multiple degrees saying, I don't care about making a lot of money. I just love tech and I think I could apply it at your company. And these are incredibly talented people. So those people that are just absolutely passionate, first of all, they have to be honest. You have to be able to trust them in tech nowadays, because in the world of AI, we are far behind in terms of figuring out how to create trustworthy environments. And that's one of the reasons why we went down the path of default denial, zero trust until it's validated. But you need to do the same thing with people. And so I would say that would be the first sort of conceptual map, would be in the industry that I have a passion for to make a difference. What is the current best utility of technology, and make that the base, because that's how you're going to have a productivity advantage over any competitor.
So this goes right in the face of what the civilized world advocates. It's trust right at the outset, but later verify. And because otherwise, in underdeveloped countries, it's totally different. You have to get whatever you are saying, stamped and signed by three different people in order for it to be worth anything. But in the civilized world, it's just declaration basis, because it's trusted already. But when you are saying that once you bring tech into it, it has to be zero trust right from the get-go, and that gives you the competitive advantage.
Yes, when it comes to intellectual property, when it comes to what you bring to the table, when it comes to inferring trust into an individual, those things are all inherently risky. And I know what you're saying. In the underdeveloped world, the lack of trust from one human being to another creates a terrible amount of friction. Right? So
Yeah.
the amount of corruption that happens at every level of government, at every kind of registration. I mean, go ahead and try to get a driver's license in Latin America, and you'll see how many times you have to make a trip to the bank in order to make this small deposit. Then you take the deposit slip over to another office where they now validate that you've done that. And these are all difficult steps. I just got my motorcycle license today, and I'm not going to make this a long story, but before I came to the studio here to record with you, I said, I'm going to just go ahead and write my license. So I go there, and the first thing she says, and in very clear directions, we're going to test your eyes, then I'm going to get you to fill in a form, and then you're going to pay me $25, and then you're going to write the test, and then if you pass all three tests, then you get a paper driver's license for a motorcycle. And I'm like, really? I do all of that before I even pay you? And you could tell she was a little surprised that I was surprised that I could do most of that and then pay. But literally from the time I showed up at the wicket until I had written the test and I had the driver's license in my hand was less than 1 hour. Everything, start to finish. Now, that in Latin America would be 4 weeks, I would say. And the reason I say that is because I've done it. It takes that long, right? And it's because of trust in systems. So I would say there's a difference between trusting well-established systems that have to do with administrative processes versus trusting something that's new. The tech stack today of AI is very dangerous, because if we just copy and paste a line of code into our terminal or into a PowerShell or into a virtual machine and we don't know what it's doing, that's where we hear all the horror stories. By the same token, those that distrust and then first apply the right boundaries, they can get incredible things done. So I'm a big advocate of tech, but knowing what you're doing is really, really key.
Yeah, I mean, this is true. I was watching, there's an old show, one of my favorites. I love legal shows, and this one was called The Good Wife. I don't know if you've seen it, but in one of the episodes, they just started a new company, new firm, and they are all over the place, and everybody has their laptops, and then they get this ransomware, and all their files are obviously not accessible, $50,000, and in the end, they have no choice but to pay. So they pay the $50,000, and as it happens, one of the partners used her old email address, and her old email address belonged to the firm that she used to be partner in, from which she obviously stole clients. So the code to unlock was emailed to her old address, and of course her old firm says, okay, if you pay us $2 million for the clients that you stole, we'll forward the email. Of course she's not going to do that. So and in the end it turns out, and it was some guy in Russia who was sitting behind, hacking into things. So and this was at this point, it's an old show. How many years old? There's a lot more going on right now. So what's the best way? So you are the expert in this. Your company, Adam Networks, does this. So for an individual, as an entrepreneur, how do they protect themselves? Do use technologies that will protect their intellectual property?
Yeah, I mean, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? So the first comment I have to make is that it's not a set it once, forget it, and it's done. It starts with an attitudinal position of doing the opposite of what typically is done for us, right? Like when you set up a phone for the first time and you go through the activation step and all the taps, whatever is bolded, do the opposite, right? That's a good way to start. And whenever you have a browser, like in Windows, your default browser is going to be Edge. Don't use Edge, right? Use something like Brave as a browser. And if you're used to, on iOS, use Safari, well, don't go to Brave instead also. So it turns out a lot of the times that the dark design is present in our lives, but it's been so socially engineered that we're not even really aware of it. So that's the attitudinal positioning that really helps you not fall into the trap that gets so many mass market campaigns to be successful. The second thing is for you to apply a little bit of vigilance in terms of protection. So when you have an internet connection, the default of your internet service provider is just to be your utility. So they give you a customer premises equipment, or a CPE device as they call it. That's your router, your Wi-Fi, everything in one. By default, as soon as you turn on your phone, you'll be online, and it's completely unfiltered, right? And so it's probably got some level of controls, maybe parental controls, maybe a safety filter, but that's not on by default, right, on any service provider. And then if you want to take the next level, this is where we come in for people that want to be serious about three key areas that we work with, is where you have a content filter, where you have a security, and where you have privacy. Privacy is important for those of us. By the way, there is a really good article at a Swiss company called Proton, where they actually articulate exactly what you are worth to Google. This is a really good exercise for you to go through, Because Nick, guys, your age and my age that run Apple devices, we are worth 5 figures to Google. People that are students that are broke on an Android phone, they're still worth like $20 to Google per year. Now, everybody has a price. And so it matters for you to know where you are in terms of value to Google, to basically determine to say, well, wait a minute, do I want to be that value to them? Because that means I am the product.
Right. Exactly.
I don't want to be the product. So if you don't want to be the product, you got to go against the default mode of everything. And so this is the area where we felt in the early days, my real driver was I need to protect my own family. And then I need to protect my own businesses. I need to protect the businesses of my brother and sisters and their families. And so it quickly grew from there that the protection ecosystem that I initially built for us was something that everybody wanted and needed. And it turns out that it cannot be done well and have it be free. So eventually we built a business model around that. But to do privacy, to do security, and to do content filtering, all three of them turns out to be using the same core set of technologies. And that is today what we call zero trust connectivity, where every outgoing connection is mapped to verify the source, verify the destination, map it to a policy, and then determine if that's necessary. So if I end up getting a phishing link from some scammer, I click on it, because if I'm not supposed to go there, it's not going to work, right? So the net result is that I end up living with a level of safety. My kids don't have to worry about, Dad, is this a scam? They can just click on it, and if it doesn't work, then it probably is a scam, right? So that's the idea behind this approach of doing default denial, but not living in fear, because that's the extreme that we don't want to encourage either. Just being a nonstop state of fear and paranoia, but everybody's out to get me. No, most people aren't. It's just that there's a small number of really, really bad people that know how to scale things really, really wide. Like, for example, today, we know there's some organization in Toronto that's been ransomed. We know this just based on the signals that we're getting of this stuff getting blocked. We don't know who, but just based on the threat intelligence that we know of bad stuff that we've submitted to Quad 9, for example, that does threat intelligence, they then in turn give us a geolocation report to say that domain has been blocked 16,000 times out of this Toronto area today, right? So we know there's something significant that happened. And so that's how we know how important it is to have this kind of protection be out there.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Every day we're using this. Another thing that I wanted you to tell everyone, David, is passwords. You know, the best way to manage passwords, because these days I still see in businesses, they put passwords in Excel files or in text files, and then they pass it around. So give us some recommendations on what's the best way to share passwords in an organization.
Yes, that is a very important one. And I should have probably started with that, because the very first a point of entry on a person's life that gets turned upside down is when their own username and password of some kind of service online has been compromised, either through lack of diligence on their own part, or the vendor where your password is stored has had a breach, and now the attacker is basically saying, give me money or else I'll release it on the dark web. And so for anybody who wants to see how badly they are exposed with their current or past email addresses, there's a website of haveibeenpwned.com. Pwned is Pwned, haveibeenpwned.com. There's a security researcher by the name of Troy Hunt out of Australia that put up this site when he started to see that this was becoming a major problem. And so that kind of gives you an indication of how many breaches there have been. I mean, tens of billions of incidents, and more than we have people with accounts. So obviously many people are part of many, many breaches, not just one. So to answer your question, the way to do password management is really, really key. And I'll tell you, first start by what the default is with people today, and then why that's not a good choice. So what's default with people is they have something like Google Chrome and store their password in the browser, or people have an iPhone or Android, which then has it integrated into their Google account. The problem is that becomes the target for an attacker. Then once they have that account access, they have access to all your other passwords. So you really want to avoid having your operating system or your browser store them. You really need to give that responsibility to a third party. Now, I do not have any stake in either of these companies I'll mention right now, but one of them is Bitwarden, because Bitwarden gives you a free option. So if you are technologically competent and you are really sure that you can be responsible and not lose your own vault, then Bitwarden's a way to do it for free and do it well. If you're okay spending a small amount of money, depending on what you do, I would recommend every family do this with something like 1Password. 1Password has Canada, US, EU specific storage depending on where your geography is, so that it stores those blobs locally. But it's been independently verified through security researchers that the way that they store your password blob is absolutely and forever inaccessible by them. You're strictly using them as a utility to store your blob, and it requires your master password plus at least one other factor in order to retrieve it. So in my case, we use YubiKeys, the physical tokens for that. And then you can use, once you have your YubiKey, that physically is the separate token for your 1Password vault, then you can utilize passkeys within 1Password or within Bitwarden to then encrypt all of your other logins that support it. More and more online services allow passkeys to be used instead of passwords. The big difference is this. This is really important. Let's go back to password for a second. A password is where you give a vendor a secret to keep, and then you're trusting them to keep it, and then to validate that you are who you are, you're telling them the secret, and they match it and say, okay, David, that must be you because you matched the secret you gave us to keep. When you use passkeys, they have no secret to keep. That is the huge innovation, and that's why passkeys are so much more secure than just a password, even if it is a single factor. And not to mention that nowadays passkeys are even more convenient than passwords, because you're not typing it out. It's your password manager that's actually punching in the passkey for you. So that would be it. Bitwarden or 1Password. Do give yourself 2 full hours to get familiar with it, to install it on your computer. Make sure that you have your backup key stored safely in your vault in physical printed form, as well as your master password, because I can't tell you how many times I have dealt with people that have lost their master password, and then if they don't have that physical backup key, you literally have a vault that the key has been destroyed for, and no one will ever get it back for you. So there are a lot of traps that you can fall into, but the worst trap is that an attacker got your password. And the least of the traps is where you just do it right and you have the inconvenience of doing things right with
everything has a price tag, right? So
yes, everything
you have
does.
to pay the price. So let's cover the last piece of becoming an entrepreneur and achieve success is what we do for the next generation. So tell us about that.
Well, that's usually my question to my guests. So this is the first time I'm on this side of the camera where you're asking me, what do we do? I think we can hope and pray that we have been a good example to them. I know my dad was an incredible inspiration to me. He was just the most perfect man. He loved his children. He inspired us. He always encouraged us, right? So I think there's a lot to be said for being a good parent. And if you're fortunate enough to have a parent, we're coming up on Mother's Day. Actually, by the time